Okay, so this is so thrilling to be here. Before I read, I wanted to share this brief little story with you because it's just too amazing not to share. So the other day, I think it was Monday, a van pulled into my driveway, like backed into the driveway, and a man popped out of the back with a giant bouquet of flowers, and I thought, oh my gosh, who could it be from? You know, is it from my brother or maybe my mother? So I opened the card, and it said, "Congratulations, Annie, you have written a beautiful book." And it was signed with love from my 5th grade teacher, Mr. Schoen. So, yes, so, and what I want to say about that is there have been so many people that have helped me along the way, and one of the most amazing things about being here in this stage of things is to be able to pay tribute to those people who have helped me. And I may have written this book in the isolation of my studio, but really we don't do anything in isolation. So thank you really all for being here tonight. I really appreciate it. So my novel is about a struggling single mother and her teenage daughter during America's most recent recession, and they teeter on and off the edge of poverty at the beginning of the book. And I'm going to read from the beginning section of the book. Chapter 1, Grit. Phil's kitchen was littered with crap. A rotisserie chicken from the convenience store down the street sat on a plate at the corner, at the center of his table. It glistened and shimmered with fat as it teetered unevenly on a pile of old papers. It was June 2005. I was 13. My mother had just lost one of her part-time jobs at Walgreens, and another landlord was threatening to kick us out. So with her movie star looks and Oscar-worthy acting, voila, out of nowhere, she produced Phil, an instant boyfriend with a place to live. It was my least favorite of her acts, but it always worked. It was over 95 degrees that day in Orange, California. The breeze from the fan in the window traveled up the chicken's spine, and the remains of a few feathers quivered. Phil sat next to my mother, across from me. He reached forward, yanked off a drumstick, and the entire arrangement shook. I just love chicken," he drawled, biting off a piece. I hated all my mother's boyfriends. Uniformly, they were jerks. This one, I decided, might also have some brain damage. A 1-800 next-day wall-to-wall carpeting installer, Phil claimed he could have a 1-bedroom house totally carpeted in under 2 hours. He talked about his job as if he were a paramedic. People need carpeting. It's important, he'd explained. And for some, it's urgent. Except for a trophy of thinning hair, coiffed and perched on the front of his head, Phil was bald. He had a big, bushy beard, and his mustache grew all the way over his mouth. It squirmed on his upper lip when he chewed. It was gross. He lived on the first floor of a run-down building on MacArthur Boulevard. His apartment smelled like carpet glue. Dark paneling was everywhere, and half the ceiling was coming down. "Oh, honey," my mother patted Phil's arm as if he were a baby. "I'm so glad you like the chicken." You'd never know it by the way she was acting with him, but my mother was fierce and smart. She could spot an asshole from a million miles away, and her favorite word by far was fuck. "I like them earrings, too," Phil gestured, nodding and pointing his chicken leg in her direction. "They go real good with your dress." She clutched her chest in a soap opera swoon. I'd seen this act 1,000,000 times before. If I had to classify it, I'd call it phony melodrama. And every man my mother ever dated fell for it. My mother finished her oogling and got up to use the bathroom. With the chicken leg in his hand, Phil stretched out his arms, yawned loudly, and showed his crooked yellow teeth. A truck whizzed by. The house shook, and a sprinkle of plaster drifted down from the ceiling like snow. Phil gazed around with a dull look and went on chewing. I eyed him across the table. Psst, I whispered. He closed his mouth and looked at me. Yeah, he said. I moved closer, pulled my glasses down my nose, and looked him in the eye. You ever hit a woman? I asked. No, ma'am. He tugged on his beard nervously. Never hit a one. I squinted my eyes lower. Well, if you ever hit my mother, I'm gonna set your beard on fire and watch you burn to the ground. My mother said I was born knowing exactly what to say and do. It was a gift she didn't have. Phil looked good and worried now. He picked his napkin up and wiped his forehead. I withdrew. I pushed my glasses up and sat back in my seat. Know what happened to the last guy who hit her? I asked. No, ma'am. He pulled on his beard again. He's dead, I stated, matter-of-factly stabbing my last piece of chicken with my fork. One of my mother's ex-boyfriends was, in fact, dead, but not because I set him on fire. He died in a car crash with whiskey on his breath. And one other thing, I added, the bathroom is gross. Clean up your overspray and put the seat down when you're done. He burped. When his mustache vibrated, he seemed surprised to feel it move. He wiped his mouth, put his napkin down, and looked at me. Fair enough, was all he said, smiling. It sent shivers up my spine. Clearly, Phil was an axe murderer. He probably had a freezer full of body parts hidden in a storage unit somewhere. I searched his place for drugs and firearms. I was sure he had kiddie porn stashed inside a drawer, but I didn't find a thing. He didn't drink or yell, and he went on saying nice things to my mother about her hair, her eyes, her makeup, her clothes. But Phil did not fool me. No matter how they started, all my mother's boyfriends turned into assholes. It was only a matter of time before Phil did too. 5 nights later, I was lying in bed when I heard a floorboard squeak. I listened and waited, but nothing happened. The day had never cooled. The air was dry and hot. The only window faced the street. The corner pane was boarded up. The plumbing clattered. A speeding car outside left a whoosh, and a smattering of shadows spun across the walls. Then one by one, footsteps in the hall got closer. When my door creaked open, my throat seized. A shadow loomed in the doorway and blocked out all the light. With Alfred Hitchcock lighting and the theme from Jaws hammering in my head, I waited for the axe to rise. I opened my mouth to let out a blood-curdling scream. In a perfect finale, it would echo on through the night. But then I heard a sigh. Push over, my mother said to me. I can't sleep. When life was just me and her, it felt like magic. When we slept, we fit together like spoons. We'd start out with her arm wrapped around me, and in the middle of the night, like clockwork, we'd switch. It made no difference where. We could be sleeping in an alley or on a single cot, but we never crowded each other or pulled the covers off, no matter how small they were. Phil, according to her, snored, but I knew what was really going on. She missed our late-night conversations like she always did, and she was bored. That night, she chit-chatted like nothing was wrong. She repeated several episodes of Roseanne verbatim. Normally, when she did this, it made me crazy, but I missed her too. So I laughed at all the right parts, and I hung on her every word. Finally, after 2 nights, she dropped the charade and started talking about what was really on her mind. Phil likes kissing too much, and his penis is small. My mother never treated me like some stupid kid. We told each other everything. But this topic made me want to kill myself. From what she'd said, the penis, I decided, was like a dim-witted, dangerous child growing between the legs. But I knew when it was best to just listen. In exchange for her confidence, I remained neutral. "I'm thinking about leaving him," she finally said one night. And even though I wanted to shout, "Hallelujah," I maintained my cool and nodded, expressionless. If I didn't, it could backfire. Like a stray cat, one false move and she'd be gone. But I got tired of waiting. So when Phil was on a carpet call, I took a gamble and made my move. I packed my stuff into 2 garbage bags and dragged them into the kitchen. My mother was there cooking, not in the way she usually did, by sticking already cooked things in plastic containers into the microwave and pressing high. She was actually wearing an apron, chopping something, and trying to use the stove. Phil had a crappy little TV with a coat hanger antenna jammed in the corner of the kitchen counter, and Wheel of Fortune, her favorite, was on. The image was fuzzy and blurry. It made the wheel look oblong. A plump lady in a plum dress took hold of the shape and spun it around. She bounced up and down and brought her hands together in quick staccato clapettes. I cleared my throat. My mother finally turned and saw me, the knife limp in her hand. I was tomboyish and rough around the edges, but she was classically beautiful. She had emerald eyes, flawlessly arched eyebrows, full lips, and a perfect figure. And she moved with natural grace, no matter how bad the conditions were around her. My mother was tired. She had me when she was 16, and even though she was now only 29, worry lines were beginning to define her face. In this light, her eyes were dull. The hints of gold in her light brown hair looked flat and dark. Her hair was up with her favorite tortoise-shell clip, but the clip had come loose and her hair was spilling out. She reached up and tucked a strand back in. Her eyes slowly traveled down my arm and rested on my bags, but she ignored me. She turned away, picked her cigarette up off the edge of the counter, took a drag, and started chopping again. "Come on, Mom," I pleaded. "We can go somewhere nice like the beach." We were only 20 minutes away from the ocean, but we'd hardly ever been. We could get beef tacos, the crispy kind with extra cheese. I knew that's how she liked them. There was more clapping on TV because someone bought a vowel. My mother looked to see which one. Ding, 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 ding. Vanna White turned over 5 E's. "Come on, Mom," I said again. My mother raised her finger. "1 minute, please," as she sounded out the clue. "One flew over the cuckoo's nest," I said. It was such a standard on this show. "You know," she said, then turned around and glared at me. "I really hate it when you do that. I almost had it. Well, I'm leaving. Are you coming or not?" But she didn't answer. She picked up the knife. Chop, chop, chop. "Mom," I stamped my foot. "I heard you." She slapped the knife down and turned around to look at me. "You think I like it here any more than you do? Well, I don't. But I don't have a job, and we have, let me add it up." She looked at the ceiling and pretended to calculate. No money. So what? I said. I failed to see what else was new. We have no money. She enunciated, loudly and slowly, as if I were deaf, then picked up her cigarette and sucked on the end of it so hard the hollows of her cheek caved in. Fine, I shrieked. I'll go by myself. I grabbed my bags, dragged them to the door. Usually, our fights escalated rapidly until we were shouting the single word jerk back and forth at each other as if we were married. But this time, there was silence. The only sound was the tick, tick, tick of the knife on the chopping board. My hand is on the doorknob, I yelled. I'm turning it. I'm pulling the door open. Have a nice life. Goodbye. Adios. A truck sped by in front of me. An empty Bud can rattled along the curb behind it. A cloud of exhaust and the bitter smell of gasoline lingered in the street. The sun felt hot enough to burn the earth to ashes. The air was so stifling I could barely breathe. My eyes fell out of focus. The city sounds of traffic moaned and slowed until I could barely hear them. But the sound of my mother's knife on the cutting board grew louder. My tactics usually worked, but I feared today they wouldn't. I took a step out the door. Flap, flap, flap. In the other room, the wheel of fortune spun around. We had our whole lives planned together. We dreamed someday we'd own a house. My version of it was always yellow with black shutters for contrast. A custom-made welcome mat would sit in front of the door with our names, Ruthie and Rita Carmichael, written in script at an angle. In my mother's version, the house was white and our names were written on the mailbox. But we both agreed our house would sit back from the road on a corner at a pleasing angle, and we'd have a pool. Bye, I swallowed. I started to close the door behind me when her chopping stopped. A long moment passed. Wait, she finally called. I'm coming.
I love that you started with the opening because you establish an entire universe in those few pages, and it's neat hearing it again after having read the whole book, but starting from the beginning. But what I was most struck by when I read the book was how Annie it sounded to me, but not autobiographical, obviously, and also it felt like Annie channeled through a fictional character. So how did you figure out that voice on the page?
Well, is this on?
I know they're weird.
It is? Okay. Gosh, okay, so how did I channel the voice of a 13-year-old? To be honest with you, it was actually relatively easy because I'm a little goofy and immature myself at times. And it was a delight. I realized that there's a freshness and a wisdom to a young voice that I think can sometimes get muddled when you get a little older. She has a very kind of simple way of viewing the world, yet it seems to be quite accurate. I don't know how to explain it. The other handy thing is that since she's a young voice, I didn't have to come up with a lot of giant words, which was nice and freeing. I was thinking, my training is really as a visual artist, and as a painter, painters tend to limit their palette. And it's not you know, how many colors you use. It's what you do with the few colors you choose. And, you know, and any painter knows that if you use too many colors, it's just going to turn into a horrible brown. So limiting myself to this kid's voice, really, in a way, I don't know. It allowed me to do much more than I could have ever done otherwise.
I see. Yeah, and so for those of you who don't know, Annie paints and also sculpts, and now has written this novel. So, can you talk about what it's like to work in these 3 different mediums? And I really liked something you said earlier about how sculpting, all these years of making these little sculptures, has really trained you to think in 3D. And so when you're coming up with a fictional character, tell us what you do.
So one thing when I was sculpting these cartoons and superheroes is I would get a sketch from the art director, and sometimes it was a very rough sketch. And so then I would have to imagine this character from all sides. I'd have to figure out if Superman was flying through the air, what his elbow might look from the back and from the side. And visualizing like that, I think, has aided my writing tremendously, because when I picture a character, I picture them from every single angle. And you know, you never know what you're going to see in the way somebody walks, you know, how they, you know, if you see the gait of your character from all angles, you never know what, you know, what detail is going to jump out at you and what that's going to tell you about their character. I like to think, you know, going back to my 5th grade teacher, Mr. Schoen, when, I don't know if any of you experienced this, but I remember in grammar school, they had us do this exercise where they said, describe how you make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And they had the bread there and the peanut butter there and the jelly there, and we all said, well, you take the peanut butter and you put it on the bread. And so the teacher took the jar of peanut butter and placed it on top of the bag of bread. And we were all like, no, not like that. So then you had to go back and, you know, figure out every single step. And you know, when you think about it, so much can be taught. You can learn so much about a character by the simple way they open up the bag. Like, do they carefully untwist the twisty, or do they hold the twisty and bat the bag around? And that can tell you so much about character. So.
Yeah. And what are for you, what do you get out of painting versus writing? What makes you want to do one or the other?
Well, what I like to say about painting, the best thing about painting and sculpting is that it's not writing.
Yeah, writing sucks.
What?
Writing sucks.
Writing
it's
sucks.
So hard.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It's extremely hard. You know, when you're painting, you have a canvas, and you have color, and you have a paintbrush, and when you're sculpting, you have a block of clay to interact with. But the poor writer has nothing but their own brain. And was it Anne Lamont, who I said, and I'll paraphrase it, the mind is a very dangerous thing. Don't ever go in there by yourself. So yeah, you know, it's just, you know, the different thing about painting and sculpting is that visual artists, we have a goal of kind of like shutting off our brains and getting to a place of more intuition and feeling. And that's, I think in some ways that's the goal of the writer too, but it's a practical impossibility because, you're dealing with your brain.
Yeah. And then also talk a little bit about dyslexia and being a writer.
Okay. So I'm dyslexic. And that has its challenges, definitely. But one thing that I've learned about dyslexia is that people with dyslexia do have the ability to kind of think and see in 3 dimensions, which I think I got my dyslexia from my father, who was an engineer. So my ability to visualize, I think, comes from that. But it is hard because, there's the writing process, but then I have to painfully stop and read what I've written, which can be a little difficult.
And another thing that's so striking about your book is how visual it is, and also how you weave that. I mean, just the passage that you read. We have that glistening chicken. We have his crawling mustache, and we also have Rita's voice telling us it's gross. And so, I guess I'm just curious to know more about visual images and how you work with them. How you do stories appear as images first, and then you go from there, or how does it work?
Yeah, that's definitely. I see it all in my mind first, and then I struggle to put it down in words, but I definitely work from the image first, and I work, as a visual artist would. Like, for example, when I'm sculpting a figure, I will, well, first of all, I always know at the exact moment in the process when I'm going to have a nervous breakdown, when I think, oh my God, how am I going to get, Wonder Woman out of this block of clay? It's just totally distressing. But the thing is, the way that I work is I as a sculptor, is I work the piece from all angles. So, and you have to, because you would never want to fill in the details before the structure of the piece is fully formed, because then, it's a mess. It's just a, so I'll make marks on the clay everywhere. So I will be able to look at the block of clay and recognize, oh, that's where the arm goes, or that's how the arm, that's how the hand sits on the hip. Nobody else would recognize that. And that's pretty much how I work as a writer. I have these images, and I make little notes on the images, so every time I read the notes, the images come back into my head, and I refine them with the language as I go on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I love it. Yeah. It's so mystifying to me. It's so, you have a very interesting brain. It's neat to hear about it. And then, and how your voice, also your writing voice, feels very similar to your visual style to me as well. And you've described yourself as a comic realist, as a writer, which seems spot on. And and so I guess talk a little bit about humor and how you put that into your work, because it's a really nice balance. Everything feels the voice in the story feels buoyant and funny, and I was laughing all the way through, but it's also very sad, and a lot of dark things happen, but it never feels out of balance. How do you do it?
God, I have no idea, actually. Okay. I guess I do have to say that kind of sort of attitude or perspective is kind of, I think it's embedded in my DNA. It's in all of my paintings. I do a lot of portraits, and they're realistic, but I use these really bold, kind of cartoonish colors. And if you go onto my website, which I hope you do, you'll see I did a series based on Gilligan's Island. And I don't know if you know this show, but these characters are total cartoons. They have absolutely zero dimension, which is completely fascinating to me. So what I tried to do is paint them with a depth, like the characters have, their faces are, they look totally despondent. So I just completely enjoy that that line between the dark and the light, and also this is a very difficult story to tell. There's a lot of painful things about it, and I think that telling hard stories, I think it's easier for people to digest them, and actually more likely that something is going to move them, move the reader, if it's couched in a little bit of humor. I think it's it's human nature to want to laugh when things are painful.
And then also it's a very political novel without being overtly political at all. And I thought that was brilliant. How clear your politics, it's about economic inequality. It's set in the near past, so it's taking on the foreclosure crisis and everything. It's very difficult to put politics into fiction, and what you've done is very effectively dramatized a complicated political situation. And so again, I know these are kind of impossible questions to answer, but what was your thinking? Why did you tell that story? How did you find that balance as well?
Oh my God, is this over yet? No, I'm kidding. I'm just kidding. Okay, I'm gonna try to answer that question. Okay, so I am sorry. I am very I'm very political by nature. Well, I'm very concerned about social justice issues, and really basically just issues of basic fairness. And but I'm not an overtly political person. I'll sign petitions, and when I can, I'll make donations, and I vote always, even in the smallest of elections. But I'm an artist, and artists, I think, actually are very powerful people. It's why so many repressive regimes try to censor art and artists. And I think that, having that kind of subversive message is basically in what art should do. I mean, not always, obviously, but if you're going to tell a story like this story, absolutely, I think that piece of it needs to be there. But I don't think people don't want to be hit over the head with it. And I think the most powerful way to convey those messages is embedded in story. And so, how's that?
That is an excellent answer. Yeah. And so, But okay, so what you've got here, it's comic, it's political, it's visual, it's character driven. There's this very powerful relationship between a mother and a daughter, not to mention all of the characters that become their kind of family. And I want to know which came first. How did it start? What was the seed? What was the beginning of the book? Was it a voice? Was it an image? Was it a desire to tell a specific story?
Well, I'm very character oriented, so I think the voice and the character came first. And I'm not the kind of person who writes with an outline. I don't have any idea where I'm going ever, really. In the process of writing, I don't. So it just kind of unfolded. But I would have to say that I think it started with that voice, and it started actually with that scene. And then it went from there.
Ah, that makes so much sense. Yeah. And how long have you been working on it for?
So I worked for almost a year and a half, and I didn't use any of the material.
Huh.
So
what was that? What didn't make the cut?
I don't know. I don't even remember what it was. It was some, I don't know. I don't even think I could find the material.
Huh.
I think I wrote almost like close to 300,000 words.
Whoa!
Yeah, I know. And I think the book is like 60,000 words.
Wow.
So, and I think it took me about 5 years, but I'm super hopeful that it won't take me that long to do my second novel.
So are you planning to?
Definitely. Definitely. Yeah.
And how? Wait, what's our time? Are we supposed to end?
We're running a little low, actually, so I wanted to see if we could open it up to Q&A soon.
That's totally fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions? I'll bring you a mic. In the back.
When did you decide to go from sculpture to writing?
I've always been very, very interested in writing. And I've done a little bit of it all along the way, starting back in 5th grade, really. A couple of years ago, exactly. I never actually thought I could do it, partly because of being dyslexic. I had the false idea that that you had to be an excellent reader in order to be an excellent writer. And so I've always been drawn to it, and I just think, the older I got, the more I just realized that life is short, and if I want to do this, I should do it now. And part of the reason, honestly, I was drawn to it is because it feels, in many ways, a more visual medium than visual art itself. So that's... I hope that answers the question. Close.
Anyone else have any questions for Annie tonight?
So I know you have sort of this dual identity as artist and writer, and you've done all this work with cartoon characters, and I wonder if you've ever thought about or experimented with graphic novels as a medium, or sort of bridging the gap.
Very good question. The question was about a graphic novel, and I haven't really thought about that too much, but the interesting thing is people ask me that a lot, and the funny thing is like graphic novels, I love them, but they are super hard for me to read because because I'm dyslexic, I have to go from looking at the drawing, the rich beauty of the visual drawing, to then switching my brain and reading the text. And it's very labor intensive for me. So, but I think I wouldn't let that deter me. I think I would, I at some point I'll probably give that a try.
Hi. I love that you dedicated the book to Mr. Schoen, who is also my 5th grade teacher.
Oh, yes.
And I also teach writing to elementary school kids, and so I'm really curious about what it was that he gave you, that you took from him.
So I neglected to mention that I acknowledge Mr. Schoen in the back of the book. He was a super special person to me. He gave me nourishment and confidence at a time in my life when I desperately needed it. And I think being a teacher is one of the most noble things there is. And so he was just an awesome man. And I sent him a copy of the book. As soon as I got it, I sent him the copy of the book. And about 10 years ago, I reached out to him and I wrote him a letter and I told him what he meant to me. And we've exchanged holiday cards ever since then. So.
Any more questions? Sorry?
I know that Katie Holmes optioned your book. Do you think she relates personally to Rita? Or, I mean, she kind of is raising her children on her own, kind of. I just wondered what you thought of that. Or you think she's going to be in it? Do you know any information about it?
I have absolutely no information about that. I can tell you this, I'm thrilled. I am so thrilled, and I hope someday soon I'll be able to thank her in person. It was just a really wonderfully validating thing, and it would be an honor if she was in the movie. But I don't know if she has any ideas about that yet.
She looks like Rita.
She's very beautiful. Yeah, she is.
We've got time for one more question tonight. Anyone else? Okay. Everyone seems to be shy tonight. Well, thanks to all of you for coming out so much, and thanks to Annie and Kate. We have more copies of All We Had at the back by the registers. Check them out if you haven't. And Annie is going to be signing at the table in the back in just a bit. Thank you so much.